Hey everyone, welcome back to the Cast and Spear podcast. My name is John, and today we have back on the show for the final episode, Erica Nelson, the host of the Awkward Angler podcast and a fly fishing guide out of Colorado. Today we're going to talk about diversity and navigating awkward conversations. Welcome back to the show, Erica.
Thank you.
So, talk to us a little bit about this topic. What is diversity and inclusion, anti-racism? Maybe we can get some definitions around that first, and then let's tie it into like the outdoor industry.
Sure. So, one of the things that I mentioned was the lack of diversity. And what I mean by that is, hey, there's no other folks of color, or there's different, um, you know, body types or LGBTQ plus type folks, or are we looking at accessibility for the folks that might be bound in a wheelchair? Or, I just kind of started to look at the lens of the fly fishing space of accessible, and who is it accessible for, and who is it catered to? And so, there's not a lot of diversity when we kind of look at it, right? When we look at age expansion or ability, especially. So that's kind of what I want to see more of, is kind of being more representative of our world population that does get in, that does fish, and there are cultural roots to that as well. And inclusion is just not only feeling welcome, but are my differences valued, celebrated, and leveraged in this space? Am I going to not only be welcomed, but I am going to feel safe? I'm going to feel like my differences are contributing to a greater impact, which is holding an inclusive space. Is kind of how I see that. And so also looking at different ways to being more equitable, looking at that accessibility piece, and not everyone, has the same privilege and access to just kind of get up and go. And so how can we make room and make space for folks that want to get into it, or want to get better, or want to start guiding? I noticed when I got into guiding, it's pretty expensive. We use a lot of our own equipment. And so how can we make this opportunity for folks that don't have a lot of money to get started in guiding? And how can we create that way of, kind of eliminating barriers for other folks to be able to participate?
Have you kind of put together some like high level initiatives or ideas around it that people can kind of listen to and get behind? So 'cause when I hear this, I hear, well, there's a marketing piece where, little kids aren't seeing, bigger kids, essentially adults, doing an activity and they look the same or look similar. So they're like, oh, I want to be able to do that. Or, they get notoriety. So they're like, ooh, like there's a YouTuber out there who is of color fly fishing. I want to be like them when I grow up. Or it just makes sense. So I could see like we need more channels that are hitting the kids where they are, right? Like TikTok
Mm-hmm.
and all that social media stuff. And then you also touched a different point where it's like money, it's expensive to begin with. So it's like there needs to be a way for maybe like the fly fishing shops to, have a program where they can do loaner stuff and they bring in kids from different parts of local, maybe underrepresented areas and kind of get them on the water. So I'm just curious, like, what initiatives are being thrown out and what's been going on over there.
Yeah. Yeah, I would say kind of on the social side, that's kind of why I started my podcast. I noticed that a lot of fly fishing podcasts are about chasing the biggest trophy trout, destination trips. And, I was kind of having this different lens of looking at this space and not feeling included, or it's not a very diverse space. And so that's when I started my podcast, was to kind of highlight some of those dark corners that we don't talk about. And so, it's a authentic series talking about social justice, fly fishing, and storytelling with folks in the outdoor industry. And the season 1 was all folks of color or marginalized identities. And kind of talking about their own experiences of getting into fishing, and what the space looks like for them, and kind of what they hope that can look like as well. And then the second season is with mostly women that are actually contributing to the fly fishing space in a more equitable way. So how are they working through awkward conversations? How are they working and navigating their own emotions when they find out that, hey, we actually do have a problem with racism in our country, and this does trickle down into the fly fishing community at times. And so how are we becoming allies in this space? And so that's kind of more or less like where my touch point is and what I'm trying to help contribute and bring these conversations to light in this space. Um, and then I'm also looking at working with different brands and organizations with money. Yeah, how can we actually put our money where our mouth is? So we're seeing companies say, "Hey, I stand for Black Lives Matter," or "I care about Pride Month." I care about XYZ causes. But it's like, are you actually investing and putting your money towards these efforts? Are you actually creating gear lockers, right, for these types of spaces? And how are you creating a more accessible clinic or guide school or whatnot? So those are some initial conversations that I'm getting started with folks in the industry. So the first step is signing the Angling for All pledge of how can we do better? How can we actually invest our money towards those folks that don't have a lot of access as well? So yeah, that is some programming and stuff that's also going on right now.
That's awesome. And then when you were saying navigating awkward conversations, how do you do that? Like, how do you make sure that like people's biases don't kind of cloud the potential to have a space to discuss? Because I feel like a lot of times, people come in with their own like baggage, and then it's very hard to, oh, you said I'm wrong. Well, I'm gonna double down on my position, which could very well be wrong, but it's not able to like be heard. So, how do you unpack that a little bit?
Yeah. Yeah, I get that a lot. Mostly folks that want to, air quote, get it right. Hey, I want to be anti-racist. I want to be inclusive. I want to have more diversity on my guide staff or in my fly shop or on my team, right? Or my client base. And I want to do it right. What's the right thing for me to do? And, I think when we start to think in terms of right or wrong, I think that's when we're really scared of just messing up. And if we kind of look at this process as a new paradigm of thinking, we're so used to technical challenges of, hey, there's a problem here and I want to solve it and not have to think about it again. We can look at checklists, right? Or learning how to fly fish. It's very linear. You have a starting place and then you have an ending place. But when we're starting to have awkward conversations around diversity and inclusion and bringing our baggage along with it, that's not necessarily a good or a bad conversation. That's kind of more an adaptive type of challenge where you're going to mess up and people don't really want to swallow that pill because we're so used to navigating perfectionism and being a good person. And I think confronting when we do mess up, that's really uncomfortable and it's really awkward. And so if we can kind of swallow that pill right from the beginning of, I'm going to mess up, but I'm here to stay in the game and I want to be better and I want to be more inclusive. I want to be more equitable. There's going to be times where I'm going to mess up and I need to accept that feedback with grace. I'd say the true diversity work is actually in the recovery. And so knowing that you're going to stumble, but how are you going to get back into that conversation? How are you going to bounce back and be that ally that marginalized communities need you to be? And so I think it's just kind of stepping out of that frame of thinking of this is a checklist and more of a circular adaptive approach of, hey, the process is the goal and I'm never going to reach the high point. But I just got to continue to learn different challenges, have some self-awareness, have some space for myself to kind of navigate this. And really the root of diversity and inclusion is really leaning on empathy and compassion for other people. And so, when we start digging in our heels with a different perception or the way that we were raised, our own perspectives, and we're not willing to hear other people's stories, I think that's when it stops, right? That's when people kind of shut down. And that is not displaying any type of empathy or any type of compassion of hearing different stories and different perspectives. So that's kind of some places to start.
I like that. And then when you said allies, can you just define that real quick? So it's like, what is expected of somebody that you hope that they'd be like an ally? Is it just somebody who's like, I hear you, I hear what the needs of a different group of people are, and so I'm going to put energy into helping those needs get resolved? Or like, what is the definition of an ally?
Yeah, I'd say just that, right? And I think it's different for different people, depending on where they're at in their own life journey and where they're at in their own space. And so, it could be anywhere from I hear you and I acknowledge that you have a valid experience, and let's move forward together, or actually taking actionable steps when we're looking at different policies. We're so quick to kind of vote on our natural environment. If like oil or drilling, it's like one thing that the angling community can kind of get together is policies on conservation. But why can't we get together for LGBTQ rights or for other indigenous land rights as well? So it's kind of anywhere from hearing and acknowledging to actually taking steps with either your voting or your dollar, or kind of being that support for a community that might need it.
Oh, this has been fascinating. I think the hardest part is always just being able to hold different ideas in your head. I think that's always been something that's it's a little bit of a challenge for people, and I'm glad that you're kind of having these conversations and opening up our perspectives. I really do appreciate it, all the hard work you're
Yeah,
doing.
thank you.
Well, Erica, thanks so much for being on the show, and guys, we'll see you on the next one. Hey guys, one more thing before you go. You can subscribe to this podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and your favorite podcast app. And if you like the podcast, please consider rating it on Apple Podcasts and leaving a review. This helps other people find the show. Thanks.